Good morning and welcome to our very first session of day 3 of the Governors for Schools conference. This session is going to be about wellbeing in Welsh schools and the role of governors. My name is Lauren Naden and I'm a Senior Partnerships Manager with Governors for Schools. For those who are visually impaired, we will be sharing a brief audio description of ourselves. So I'm hosting today's session and I am female, white British in my early 30s with blonde shoulder length hair. Before I introduce our speakers and the session, just a few housekeeping notes to be aware of. So to ensure that our sessions are as accessible as possible, closed captions are available. And as I mentioned, speakers have been invited to share a short verbal description of themselves. The chat function is disabled, but if you'd like to ask any questions, please put that into the Q&A panel and we will endeavour to get to those at the end of the session. Please be aware this session is being recorded and links to the video will be sent out to everyone who registered for the event afterwards in the next couple of days. You can follow the conference as well as like and share the content on social media using the GfS Conference 21 hashtag. We'll also send you a brief survey at the end and we'll be grateful if you could complete this. This session is a particularly exciting milestone for us at Governors for Schools, as it is our very first webinar aimed specifically at governors in Wales. Obviously, we hope it will be the first of many. And with a whole school approach sitting at the centre of Welsh Government policy on emotional and mental wellbeing in schools, it's a really pertinent topic for us to be starting off with. Governors have a really important role to play in supporting wellbeing, and so we're delighted to be joined by 4 speakers who are going to share their insights with us today. First up, joining us, we have Tate Bevan. Tate has been in education for 30 years, 10 of those as a head teacher at a large multi-faith city school, and has also recently moved to the Educational Consortia in South East Wales to become Assistant Director, leading on equity and wellbeing. We then have Sinead McFraherty. Sinead is CEO of Charity Education Support, which supports the mental health and wellbeing of teachers and education staff in schools, colleges and universities. The charity supports schools in Wales, and Sinead is also a governor at a primary school. We then have Mike Tate. Mike has worked in education for 30 years, currently Assistant Director of Education and Lifelong Learning with Cardiff Council, where he leads on school improvement and operation, but over the last 18 months, a particular focus on the COVID response. Previously a head teacher, Mike has over 20 years leadership experience in schools in Wales in all key stages. And finally, we were due to be joined by Tabitha Sawyer, who is a head teacher at Asgore Penarth, a primary school in Colwyn Bay that has been taking a proactive approach to wellbeing. Unfortunately, due to low staff numbers in the school caused by COVID cases, Tabitha has had to prioritise the needs and the wellbeing of her staff. Obviously, this is something that we wholeheartedly support her in, given the topic for today. But we did want to share with you this today because it really illustrates the continued pressures that our schools and our educators are facing. Fortunately, Anthony Priest has agreed to step in Tabitha's place. Anthony is Workplace Wellbeing Advisor at Education Support, and he's based in Wales and utilises his expertise to support staff wellbeing in schools in Wales. And so, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Tate.
Thank you very much. Bore da, good morning and a very warm welcome to this session to everybody. I'm going to spend my 10 minutes, if we could have the next slide please, giving you a national picture, just putting all of this session into context. Then we will drill down and have a look at the benefits of developing and adopting that whole school approach to wellbeing. And then we will look at the role of the leaders within our school. How can they do it? What mechanisms have we got in the system to support them? And then I will finish off with the tools to support embedding a whole school approach to wellbeing. And that is very much around your role as a governor. So where are we in Wales? If I could have the next slide, please. It is an absolute pleasure to be working in Wales within education, because the messages that are coming out from Welsh Government is that wellbeing is at the heart of all their work. This slide just provides an overview to the various acts and commencement orders that have been adopted within Wales. We've obviously got the Equality Act of 2010, the Social Services and Wellbeing Act of 2014 that was formally adopted on the 6th of April 2016. And that act, it very much provides Wales with the legal framework for improving the wellbeing of people who need care and support, and carers who need care and support, and for transforming our social services in Wales. This is complemented with Wales being the only country to adopt a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and that is about making Wales a better place for future generations. And then if we really do just look through the lens of education, we have two acts that have been adopted within Wales. One is the Additional Learning Needs Act, very much focused about that pupil-centred planning, looking at the needs of our learners to ensure they have a fair access to their educational flight path. And of course, the umbrella to all of this work in schools is the Curriculum for Wales, where wellbeing is a trunk of its work, and we know that health and wellbeing is one of those key areas of learning. Now that just doesn't stand on its own. On top of that, Wales has adopted the rights of the child, and that is a golden thread through the new curriculum. We've obviously got the new National Educational Mission that focuses on the wellbeing and equity offer to all our learners. We have the Healthy School Network that has been in place in our schools since 1999. And we are also engaging in PISA, which is about measuring wellbeing and life satisfaction for our 15-year-olds. So that slide just tells us there is an awful lot going on, but at the heart of it all is wellbeing, and that's wellbeing of everyone. So if I could have the next slide, please. This slide just tells us the benefits of our schools and settings actually immersing themselves in the life of wellbeing and to start that journey. And it's not about starting from scratch. It is about building on what schools are already doing. But why? There's got to be a purpose for it. We know that addressing wellbeing in all our schools and settings for all ages improves the quality of teaching and learning. We know we have happy teachers if their wellbeing is addressed, if they have access to the right level of support. We know that that gives a higher level of job satisfaction, productivity, and efficiency. Pupils are at their happiest when their teacher is in front of them delivering their subject areas. We know that pupils whose wellbeing are being addressed engage more in their learning. And those top two bullet points are really underpinned by in-depth research conducted by the Education Endowment Foundation. We know that pupils become more resilient, can concentrate more, engage in more, and have an understanding of their destination and their route of how to get there if their wellbeing is addressed in schools. And we mustn't forget about that wider community. Those parents, those carers need to feel that their wellbeing is being addressed by their school. They feel welcomed within the school building, and they can then support their children to continue their educational journey. So if we could have a look at the next slide, because we need to think, we know there's an awful lot of benefits to the school, but we also are very aware in Wales there's a lot going on in the education. As I've already said, we've got schools working within the new ALN Act, within the new Curriculum for Wales. But Welsh Government has released a framework on embedding that whole school approach to emotional and mental wellbeing. It has been issued as a statutory guidance to governing bodies, and the documentation does outline several actions and requirements on schools, governing bodies, local authorities and consortia. This document is very much a mechanism of supporting all our schools, of reviewing where they are with wellbeing and what they need to do next. It's always about building on what is already available. Now, one of the golden threads through this document is about developing that whole school approach. And it does mean about engaging with everyone, from leaders to workforce, to children, to parents, to the wider community and to partners beyond. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. When we're talking about the whole school approach, this is about embedding the good well-being through teaching and all aspects of life, whether they are extracurricular activities, whether they are life enrichment activities, workplace opportunities. This is about looking at the ethos and the values of your school. That's developing what we're calling the culture. And what our ambition is that all schools and settings have a culture of well-being in which the learners can thrive and the staff feel a sense of belonging and they have a high level of job satisfaction. It is about creating that supporting environment. And there's two elements to think about with this bullet point on the screen. You need the support mechanisms in place to support pupils when they need some additional support to address their well-being, and that can be mentors, it can be professional coaches. Many of our schools have school-based counsellors. It's about having intervention programmes such as ELSA, but it's also about driving it through the curriculum, because driving it through the curriculum will mean that in the future we will have learners who are far more resilient and take ownership of their own well-being. As I've already said, this is about building on good practice that exists in the school, and it exists with those professional partners. And one of the key ones of those is the Healthy School Network, who have been working closely with their schools. But this document is also about health and education working together around the pupils' needs. And so it does engage with all the CAM service that is on offer throughout Wales. So where do you sit in this plethora? It's really, really important that you as governors, if I could have the next slide, please, are aware of where your school is regarding wellbeing, the approaches they've taken. If you have an idea of their provision map, and that is very much about having a tiered approach to supporting the well-being of the learners, making sure that there is a lot on offer to support those learners with their universal offer. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. But where do you sit? This slide gives you a couple of suggestions of takeaways for you to go and explore where your school and setting is. You can go, and when the time is right, remembering the extra pressures currently on our schools as a result of the pandemic, to go in and undertake an audit. That can literally be a walk through the school, because that will give you a feeling of how far wellbeing is embedded into the culture in that school. What are the displays? What are the learners telling you about how their school cares for them? What are the staff telling you about how the school supports them? What is the curriculum saying about wellbeing? The other bullet point is for you to go in and do some talking to learners. You know, talk to learners about what do they want to do as their career? Have they had help and support in getting the advice to get to their destined career? What's their favourite subject? Why is it their favourite subject? Where do they go to when they need some extra support with their learning or with their social and emotional needs? Then it's about bringing this back to the governors' meetings. You going out, doing your fact finding, but coming back and sharing the information, making sure wellbeing is a key item on your agenda will help instill and grow this area within your discussions, and it does engage all governors, whether you're the community governors, the LA governors, the chair governors, or whether you've got key links. It is about having that powerful discussion, going back, fact-finding, sharing and celebrating what the school is doing and supporting them with their next areas of development. So that's all from me now. I'm going to hand over, but I will stay on the screen for any questions that you may have later. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kath. It's wonderful to hear that kind of Welsh policy context to this important subject. I'm now going to hand over to Sinead from Education Support.
Thanks a million, Lauren. Just a verbal description of myself for colleagues on the call who are visually impaired. I'm a middle-aged white Irish woman with blue eyes and greying hair, greying at a faster rate than I would wish, let me say. Good morning, and many thanks for inviting me to join you here this morning. You know, so helpful to hear from Kath that wider context and to help us just position this whole conversation clearly in the policy context. Education Support, the charity that I lead, has been around for 144 years and across its lifetime has worked on issues of education staff well-being. That's at the heart of what we do. We were set up by teachers for teachers all that time ago, and these days remain very focused on this agenda around mental health and well-being of staff. And of course, one of the big reasons why we do that is it's our belief that if you have staff in a school who are well and able to operate at their best, they will be best placed to offer the kind of teaching, learning opportunities and pastoral care support to our children and young people that they possibly can. And so that's our ethos. If I could have the next slide, please. Just a very quick run through what we do as a charity. We have a helpline that's free at point of use, through which anyone working in education can access counselling. And that's with qualified counsellors, people who are trained to listen and support people. We, through that, support everyone. You know, we take 2 calls a day from individuals who work in education and are clinically assessed to be at risk of suicide. So we deal with some fairly weighty and serious issues there. But we also take the majority of our calls from people who have nowhere else to turn particularly, or don't feel confident to raise issues that are affecting their well-being, either domestically or in a work environment. And so the listening ear that we provide offers them an opportunity to share what's going on. So you can, by all means, signpost that helpline to everybody in your schools. We also provide financial assistance to any educators who are in difficulty in that way. And we have a raft of resources on our website, both for individuals and for schools to use to support well-being policy and actions within the school environment or personally. So I'd encourage you to have a look there if you want to offer some support to your school. We also provide services directly to schools. You will hear a little bit more about my colleague Ant's work as a wellbeing advisor in Wales, and that's a service that's available to schools across the country. But we also provide employee assistance support. We do facilitated peer support for leaders to bring them together and let them share as a group the experience that they're having, which of course over the last 18 months has been extraordinary. And those opportunities for people to come together and share their experience offers a really important and rich way for professionals to look after their own well-being. We also research the health of the workforce and then use that insight to influence policy and develop services where we can. Next slide, please. To the question of why is teacher well-being important, there is a deep body of research at this point that gives us information about why we need to turn our attention to this. And I'm not going to go through the dry statistics this morning because frankly, it's before 8:30. You may not have had coffee and you can peruse these statistics at your own leisure if you want to. So I'm sending you off to our website. There's a whole research section and there are pages and pages of data on this stuff if you would like to learn more. Next slide, please. But the big headlines that I will draw out for you, something's gone wrong with my slides, haha. Hannah, I think that Lauren, I think the slides that I sent through are not the right slides. So I'm going to suggest that I email them to you and you can circulate to colleagues, but we might want to stop sharing because I suspect they won't have the slides about the role for governors, but we'll see. But they're not the same slides that I have on my screen. So something went haywire in the slide transmission, but I'll circulate them to colleagues who want them. What I wanted to highlight to you is that the big issues that affect teachers and why teacher well-being is so very important are that we have years worth of data now that demonstrate for us that stress among educators is high. It's higher than the general population, and it has been there for quite some time. So when we think about the profession and we think about why we would pay attention to well-being in a school context, it's because we're dealing with people who are disproportionately stressed, and we're seeing higher levels of poor well-being symptoms among educators, among our teachers, and indeed also school leaders. Though in Wales, school leaders are relatively in better health and have better well-being than many of their colleagues across the rest of the UK, which I think is a really positive reflection of the autonomy, agency, respect and status actually that school leaders have in Wales relative to other parts of the UK. So I take that as a strong positive. Nonetheless, we're still seeing higher levels of symptoms of poor well-being among that population than the general population. So there's something that we need to attend to there. It cannot be right that we have higher levels of stress, lower levels of well-being among those who are working in schools. And the other issues that exist for us as governors to think about is that support at school level is quite variable. It's not consistent across the piece, and there are genuine barriers to people reaching out for help, whether that's that they feel that they will be judged in a professional context, whether it is, so many of us have our own barriers in the sense of, I'm not someone who needs help with my mental health. I get on with this and I do it, and I'm a professional. There's a lot of identity issues that people have that prevents them from reaching out for help. And actually, if anything good has come from the pandemic, it has been a wider recognition that mental health and well-being affects all of us, and that there is no weakness in recognizing that we might want to take care of ourselves and we might need a little bit of help. Actually, there's tremendous strength in that, because if we don't recognize it, we're more liable to fall over it. One of the things I would want to draw your attention to is that when you're thinking about staff well-being, and obviously you're thinking about that, you're thinking about the whole school approach, you're thinking about pupils and parents as well as staff. But when you're thinking about this, I would suggest it's worth thinking about different levels at which well-being matters. So there's the very obvious one that individuals are affected by, their own values, their own temperament, the situations that they're exposed to, their own health situation. And that is sort of topmost of what affects people around their well-being. But the workplace is very significant. About a quarter of our life satisfaction is directly rooted in our job satisfaction. And that in turn is significantly influenced by the quality of relationships that we have in our place of work. So looking at the workplace and understanding how the structures and practices that we're putting in place in the workplace are affecting the well-being of individuals really matters. And the third level, I think, that also matters if we zoom out a bit is all that stuff Kath was talking about, the wider policy environment. Is it supportive of positive well-being, or is it in ways having, not intentionally, but is it having a negative impact on the well-being of the professionals? And again, we're a national charity, we work across the United Kingdom. What I see happening in Wales is very positive. In terms of how, you may not feel it always on the ground, but the way in which policymakers interact with educators is to listen. They may not listen as much as you want, and they may not make the decisions you want, but it is an engaged relationship. And I think that matters and is important. So it's something to really ensure that we sustain. But to turn to the role of governors more explicitly, I guess, when we're thinking about well-being in schools, I think there's some, and I'll circulate slides if you want these with some of these bullet points on there. But as Kath said, it's really important to know the whole school approach, to understand that framework. It's important for you as governors to make sure that that's clearly owned in the school, and clearly owned on the governing body. You know, whether it's a Wellbeing Link governor or another governor who has responsibility for this. It is the responsibility of the whole governing board, but that is made easier if we have one governor who will take a lead and be the coordinating point for making sure that we understand what's happening in the school, what the school leadership team is trying to achieve, and how they're going about trying to achieve that. So for the governing board to have visibility, if you like, of the vision around well-being that the SLT, the head teacher, is holding and trying to execute. And then, of course, to be able to have an overview of how the progress of that is going. You know, we might have some warm words about well-being, but are we actually in practice able to get much done? And it would be very understandable if there were delays in that. I mean, there's so much going on in, you know, we have a head teacher not joining us this morning due to staff shortages. That's very common. There is not a surfeit of capacity in our schools at the moment. So it's not about penalising and being upset with our school leadership teams if progress is delayed. It's about understanding it and trying to figure out, is there anything as a governing body we need to do differently to resource this activity or support this activity? What can we do to help our school leaders make progress on this agenda? I think the other thing governors importantly need to do is to role model good well-being and role model behaviours. You know, not phoning the head teacher at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. We say, and everybody laughs, haha, imagine that. People do routinely, and Sunday mornings and all the rest of it. And, you know, having some respect for the boundaries of people's time and recognizing that's a matter of well-being, I think is important for us as governors to do. And appreciation. You know, one of the really simple and inexpensive things that we can do as governors is to appreciate staff, to recognize the contribution they make, to let them know that we see it and that we value it. And that, we've loads of research that shows has a direct correlation to job satisfaction and therefore job performance. Ultimately, we will enable our school staff to perform better if they feel like we are really appreciating and seeing them. I'm going to finish up, but just very quickly to land with you. So the priorities from my perspective as a governor looking at this, I think the priorities for governors are to make sure that there's a clear plan in the school, to make sure that staff voice has a channel, that we're able to genuinely hear what staff think and feel and need and want, and that there's some baseline measurement in place so that we're able to track over time whether staff are feeling the benefit of a focus on well-being. Because if staff experience a focus on well-being as a negative pressure, we're probably not getting it right. To make sure that there are reflective spaces in the school environment. It's easy to talk about reflective practice and reflection. It's hugely important to well-being for professionals to be able to come back, think about the purpose of their work, and think about the impact of their work on themselves. So making sure there is space for that, and that our staff have access to skills and knowledge you know, about well-being and everything they need. I'll also put some resources in the chat. We have some free resources across our website, including e-learning tools. And as I say, my colleague Anthony is going to speak in a little bit, and he'll tell you more about some of the services that we can offer schools in Wales as well. Thanks a million, Laura.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sinead. Apologies for the issue with the slides, but we will make sure that the correct slides can be downloaded by everyone afterwards. And we will also make sure that some of those links that you mentioned are also shared in the follow-up email as well. So thank you so much there, Sinead. I'm now going to hand over to Mike.
So now I haven't got any slides today, so I'm just going to be talking, but it's quite interesting on following on the back of Kath and Sinead, because I think Kath very much contextualised well-being in Wales, which I think was really, really important for his introduction to what I'm going to talk about. And then Sinead started to talk about some of the key elements. Now, as I said, my name is Tate. I'm Assistant Director for Education for Cardiff. I'm in my early 50s, slight build, short hair and a bit of a grey in beard. Previously, I was a head teacher across Wales in federated settings. I set up the first formal Welsh Federation of Schools in Wales, as well as one of the first all-through schools in Wales. And I actually started in Cardiff as the assistant director, probably 4 months prior to the first lockdown. And the reason I say this is that actually my approach in terms of supporting head teachers and their well-being in Cardiff very much came from my own background and understanding. I think Sinead talked about listening and building relationships. And I think this was absolutely vital to understand where head teachers were and to understand what head teachers needed through this time. Because we got to March 2020 and we didn't know what was coming. And I think that was really, really important, was that people didn't know what was over the horizon. They knew that they were going to be closing schools, and actually prior to lockdown, schools were closing because, you know, we said today we've got a head teacher who's not joining us today. This was where we are in March. We had schools closing left, right and centre because of staff availability, because they were staying home looking after sick relatives. It was a really difficult situation. And it was a situation that nobody knew anything about. So people were stepping into the unknown, and they were looking at head teachers, the leaders of those schools, to be able to lead them through this, to lead them through something that the head teachers had no experience of. And I think this was really, really critical to understand. So as a local authority, we wanted to really wrap around our head teachers. And, you know, I'm focusing now on the well-being of head teachers during the pandemic. Yes, we understand the wider sense in terms of pupils and wider staff. But, you know, what we wanted to do was ensure that the leaders could lead through this period, because if they could lead, that way they gave confidence to the schools, confidence to the parents, and confidence with the governors as well. So it was critical to support our head teachers. At the time, head teachers were being bombarded, absolutely bombarded with advice, guidance, which was changing by the minute. You only had to turn on the news. Everywhere you looked, all media channels were full of different things, data, different views on the pandemic, what was going to happen. So what we wanted to do was to cut through the chatter. We wanted to give a very clear view for our head teachers. And really, as a local authority, what we wanted to do was to make sure that the head teachers didn't feel alone. Because there are times when you're a head teacher, and I speak from experience here, that it is the loneliest job in the world. And so what we wanted to ensure was that at no time during the pandemic did we have any head teachers feeling that they were alone. We wanted to create that team around them. So as a local authority, we wanted to ensure that they knew they had a team, they knew who that team were, they knew how to contact them, they knew that they could contact them whenever, but they were fully supported, whatever was coming over the horizon. And of course, at the time, we didn't know what was coming over the horizon. So what we wanted to do, we interpreted all that guidance. And what we did, we cardified it. We put it into a Cardiff version for our head teachers so that they understood that this is what we were doing. And, you know, initially back in March 2020, we went in a very, very short space of time to where schools were open, to where schools were closed, you know, left, right and centre, different parts of the schools were closed. And then ultimately we went straight into a hub-based model. And we led this by discussions with head teachers. So we made those decisions after communicating, after talking. And I know Sinead, one of the key focuses there was communication, was building relationships. And that was absolutely fundamental to whatever we did. So we went into building a hub model where groups of head teachers started to work collaboratively. And I think that was a really important starting point for us through the pandemic, because what it allowed was it added an extra layer of support for those head teachers. So initially, while everybody was finding their feet, head teachers weren't alone. They had other people to really support them and other people that knew what they were going through. As we developed the links, developed the hub-based approach, I had all of my teams, all my senior management linked to groups of schools. And this was the first time this has happened. Prior to this, all my officers were very much silo-based, whether it was ALN or support for schools or resources. Now what I had was my SMT right across were working with groups of schools. They were the direct link. So initially, any questions, any communications would go through that EMT link, so that the head teacher had one point of contact. That EMT link then also had a health and safety link officer. So any issues related to health and safety, again, went through the EMT link. All head teachers on a weekly basis then had weekly calls to ensure they understood and they got the support, but also we could listen to head teachers. We then had group feedback sessions on a weekly basis, regular webinars, certainly every couple of weeks, and the EMT links would virtually go into those schools and just link up with the head teachers. Throughout all of that period, all the heads in Cardiff had my own personal email, had my own mobile as well, and they were encouraged to use it. And Sinead, I know you were talking about the boundaries and the barriers of when governors would get in contact with head teachers. Initially, I opened up that there weren't any barriers, and so that head teachers could contact me and talk to me whenever they needed. And, you know, even if that was just to let off some steam and just to rant even and to cry in many occasions, then that was the case. So my phone was on 24 hours a day, and I was there for heads as the first point of call, just to answer any questions, just to calm things down and just to reassure. From there, we could link in with our team around the schools and team around the head teachers. Now, what I thought this did for us was that very quickly it developed the relationships. Very quickly, Cardiff became quite a small place for having 127 schools. Head teachers very quickly felt supported, understood they were supported, and knew where to get advice. So that as we moved from hub-based to return to school, to then the first summer, where we undertook lots of activities throughout the summer to support our vulnerable pupils, back to reopening September 2020 and beyond, when we had to flex all of the guidance, when we had to make the changes, we did that in relationships with the head teachers. So they knew they were absolutely fully involved. Equally, at the end of the phone, they knew that there would be someone who could answer any question that they had. Now, through the autumn term in 2020, Estin came out and did a big review of the support to schools from local authorities and consortia through that period. And the positive feedback really came from heads was about that relationship building, was about how supported they felt, because they felt that now officers were supporting those schools. And that was absolutely critical during this time. We also did a lot of webinars and catch-up work with our governors as well. So again, they could understand their role within this, that their head teacher was getting support. And I spoke with many governors actually in terms of getting additional support. So what we then did was used our HR department within the authority to build on wider support for our head teachers. Now, I think one of the big bonuses that's come out of this period, not only is that building relationships, but also about the high level of intelligence it's given us about schools. We're in contact with schools on a daily basis. I'm actually surprised my phone hasn't gone off when I've been speaking here today. But we have that high intelligence now of schools at a time when actually the intelligence through KPIs is not there. So we've got this more emotional intelligence and understanding of exactly what is going on in schools. I think also as a very important spin-off from this and a real benefit from this, my officers have felt more involved with their schools. And I think that is absolutely critical, because it has allowed them to see their role and develop their role within schools. And I think that's something that I get fed back to me quite a lot from my officers, is that they feel better understood and valued by schools during this time. So it's raised the profile of my officers. But I think above all, right across Cardiff, what it's allowed us to do through this time, it's allowed us to develop a shared ethos of responsibility, where we're all in this together and we're all working together for the good of the whole pupil. So really what we've done through the pandemic with the support and putting that support around, this approach has become embedded in whatever we do now. And this is something that we will continue to do moving forward. And we now still have those weekly head teachers meetings. We have the weekly focus group meetings. We still have our EMT links to each of our schools within Cardiff. So we've still allowed us to build up that intelligence. But also what we continue to do is we listen, and we really do take notice of exactly what our head teachers are saying when we're looking to develop policy and approach within Cardiff. So what we've tried to do is, from a period of uncertainty, we've really tried to stabilise Cardiff. We've really tried to reassure within Cardiff. And throughout all of this, we've tried to build that team and that relationship that I think in future will push us on as a stronger authority because of where we've come from.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's really interesting to hear about how that kind of moment of crisis has actually, you know, does have some benefits to it, or it's brought some positives out of it. Just want to very briefly, before I hand over to our final speaker, just remind the audience that the Q&A panel is there, and we will endeavour to answer those questions, so please do make use of it. But I'd just like to hand over to Anthony now. Thanks.
Very good morning to everyone attending this morning. As Lauren mentioned at the start of the talk, I am not the head teacher at Asgore Penarth, but I'm very pleased and honoured to step in this morning to speak on Tabitha Sawyer's behalf as head teacher of this school, and also had the pleasure this year of supporting the school to look at some strategies around staff mental health and well-being. So my name is Anthony Priest. I work for education support, and obviously we've had Sinead, the CEO, speak this morning as well around the charity, so I won't go too in depth about that, but at the end I'll quickly touch on some of the support that is available directly to schools, local authorities, with funding from Welsh Government this year, building on a package of support last year across Wales. So my background is very much in mental health and well-being, also a qualified teacher, and I'm in my mid-30s, male, short hair, and I'm sporting some dashing spectacles and headphones this morning for the talk. So yes, I'm going to give a bit of an update this morning on how Asgore Penarth, the head teacher, the governing body, have worked together over the last year to really focus on the whole school approach, I guess, and also well-being at the core of its sort of ethos and values, really. So next slide, please. So this opening statement, I guess, and mission statement, where a lot of Asgore Penarth's values are sort of really drawn out. And one area that I know Tabitha wanted to highlight is that sort of bottom few sentences, where it looks at in doing this, we place well-being at the heart of our school community and root in everything that we do, with a whole school approach to promote positive emotional and physical well-being. So very much externally and internally with values in the school, well-being is very much driven at the heart of the school and the community, and also externally as well. So this is something that the school really works on, doesn't see as a tick box as far as my work with the school as demonstrated, and it's something that's constantly evaluated, and also you know, getting the perspectives of pupils, staff, governors, community, and I think that really shines through in some of the strategies that the school has adopted this year. Next slide, please. So how does this look in practice, and what are some of the activities linked to the whole school approach, emotional health and well-being? So here are just some examples, and no doubt speaking with many schools last year, you know, a lot of these initiatives and programs are already embedded in the fabric of our schools across Wales, but just to draw on a couple of examples there. I know Asgore Penarth really sort of links the 5 ways to well-being throughout daily school life. So, you know, I've sort of seen examples of how the 5 ways to well-being are focused on every day of the week in school through different activity, through you know, educational videos, through engaging different pupil groups and pupil forums. Also pupil voice that looks at changes in the schools, so pupil-led planning, a school council, an eco-council. These are some of the things that really draw in student voice in the planning and changes at the school, with well-being, like I said, at the heart. Also the work that the school does with the cluster, and I know Mike mentioned this, around bringing head teachers together as hubs and to having that, you know, shared sort of practice and a place to discuss, you know, not only the whole school approach, but also how, you know, heads are managing difficult situations, but also supporting staff and pupil mental well-being. So that's a big support network for the school. And also some initiatives there around tapping into emotional interventions to support the environment. Kath mentioned earlier on around ELSA training, and also Seasons for Growth, Lego therapy, Draw to Talk. So these different sort of initiatives that really promote well-being across the school. Next slide, please. So Mike mentioned there around the COVID pandemic really hit hard, and obviously none of us really knew what was coming around the corner really, and I've just got huge admiration for head teachers across Wales that I've spoken to this year that have managed in very difficult circumstances. And I think drawing on Tabitha's experience and the school's experience, here are some things that the school sort of brought out, or sort of did in this time. Around engagement registers, so really looking at engagement and how that was affected during periods of the pandemic and the response. Also holding wellbeing calls, so wellbeing calls with children and with parents actually, and families. Teams check-ins, so check-ins with people, but also wellbeing check-ins with staff, which seem to really be appreciated by staff. Online parents meetings, so really again incorporating sort of parents and the wider community in thoughts and planning during this period. Blended learning policy and taking feedback on that, and also running regular sort of snapshot surveys as well to get temperature checks where things were, and also well-being was a focus during some of those surveys during that period. Next slide, please. So where does this flip? Well, I guess, where does this focus on staff well-being? And this is where some of my direct work with Asgore Penarth has come in really. So next slide, please. And very much this sort of, you know, this sort of ethos, I guess, and many speakers have picked up on this, but this analogy around, you know, fitting our own oxygen mask first before we can help those around us. So looking at our own self-care and fitting our own oxygen mask before we can fit the oxygen mask of others. And again, from experience of being a teacher myself and working across education and well-being, I know that self-care can be you know, a topic that can be hard to grapple with as professionals, especially in very caregiving professions, I've found. So very much real focusing on staff well-being and asking staff what would benefit their well-being during this time, and taking staff on that journey, you know, and this will lead on to a few of the next slides around a staff well-being group at the school. Next slide, please. One of the things that the school really led on, and I'm glad to say we supported with, was actually doing quite a wide staff well-being survey, and this really looked at a few different things, asking how staff were feeling, were they adequately supported, communicated with, were they aware of support mechanisms, policy, and also, you know, do they know and feel comfortable to access support? And also asking staff, you know, as a school, you know, if there are a few things that we can work on within reason over the next 6 to 12 months to promote staff mental health and well-being, what would your key things be in that? And really sort of driving that through staff message. So the staff survey was a real useful strategy and tool for the school to galvanise their policy and strategy and take staff with them as part of their whole school approach. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of, and we see these, you know, a lot up and down the country, but just a staff wellbeing area of the school that really focuses on, you know, getting messages across the staff that support is available. The school has 2 mental health first aiders that are trained, that are part of the wellbeing group and sort of help with leading initiatives and providing signposting across the school community. But really sort of making it front and center really and promoting the sort of the things that are going on in the school that are available. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned earlier on, a wellbeing group, a staff wellbeing group has been set up at the school, and this is an approach that you know, quite a few schools have taken, I would say, this year, to have, again, to drive that staff voice and really you know, give some ownership across the staff group around how we can shape our wellbeing strategy. So that just gives you a flavour around the breadth of staff that actually make up that group. And all being well, I'll be patching into that group this afternoon in the school just to you know, talk with them and give them some support as well. But very much across different job roles across the school, and it has that different perspective then of staff right across the school community, and I think that's really important as part of a staff wellbeing group. Next slide, please. Communication was something that I know Tabitha was really keen to work on and get right during this period, and that comes in many forms. And you know, many schools again would have their own sort of approach to this, but regular bulletins with staff, making those bulletins, you know, quite sort of concise and sort of quality information, notice boards, COVID staff handbooks with information around well-being, real showing the collaborative approach to the thinking around the new curriculum. Wellbeing as an agenda in staff meetings. I know this was already picked up in a previous talk around wellbeing as an item on governors meetings, but wellbeing as part of staff meetings. A real honesty, and I won't cover all of this for Tabitha this morning. I know if she comes back and does a talk in the future, she'll talk about a personal blog that she wrote as a head teacher that she shared with her staff around her own you know, ways that she was grappling with the pandemic and sort of, I guess, struggles as well. But that blog was certainly a powerful piece for the school. Back to work interviews. So, you know, when staff were returning to work, that they would have a return to work or a welcome back chat with wellbeing part of that focus. And Sinead picked this up earlier on as well around appreciation. Really thinking about how we embed honest and genuine appreciation of all the real hard work that staff are doing up and down the country and in our schools. And again, I know one of these schemes or one of these sort of you know, themes last year for the school was around Teaching Assistant Appreciation Week. Very much looking at, you know, how do we show appreciation to our teaching assistants that do some fantastic work to support, obviously, teaching and learning in our schools. Next slide, please. So how this links to governors, and I'm coming to an end of the presentation this morning. At Asgore Penarth, Wellbeing and Curriculum Committee meets each term. So there's a Wellbeing and Curriculum joint together committee that meets each term. There's a health and wellbeing team with lead governor. So there's a link governor for health and wellbeing at the school. As part of the school development plan, improving on provision over a 3-year period, or looking at this piece in the school development plan has been there and a focus. And also regular check-ins with the chair and head teacher over the phone, and so that supportive wellbeing relationship, and also driving the wellbeing agenda across the school as part of those discussions. Next slide, please. And the last slide from me, but from Tabitha, is that wellbeing should be a whole school approach. It should involve pupils, staff, community partners, professionals coming together to really promote the best we can for everyone that is operating in education. A real big point here about staff mental health and well-being, and well-being generally, it's living and breathing. You can never say that you've done it. At a tick box, we've done mental health in our school, we have a policy. There's a need for continual reviewing, prioritization, and honesty and openness as well in this area. So it's something that we don't just do when it's a tick box. It's part of our fabric, and we review and we try and prioritize in the other sort of ambitions and goals that we have in school. And also an open door policy as well. Mike really picked up this point around that connection with head teachers and having some way to go and support. So that real genuine open door policy where staff can really come and talk openly, honestly, without feeling that they're restricted in that sort of communication channel, and that's been really beneficial for the school and head teacher. So I hope I've done Tabitha, Sawyer and Asgore Penarth some justice there around some of the messages. There were more messages, but hopefully that's give you a flavour of how a school has worked on the sort of a whole school approach to wellbeing sort of the last couple of years, and very much will build upon this through the framework going forward. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anthony. That was fantastic. And I do hope at some point we may be able to have Tabitha for another session at another time. That was wonderful for you to share. And thank you to all of the speakers as well. We do have just a little bit of time for a question, and there is a question from our audience that I would just like to share. So Michael just says that, with around 15 to 20% of the population being neurodivergent, I'd like to invite our panelists for any comments on kind of concerns regarding wellbeing as it relates to neurodivergent staff, pupils and parents, and how we can ensure that wellbeing serves all populations within a school. Sinead.
Hey, Lauren, I think I think this question really draws our attention to a key point around wellbeing here, which is about inclusivity. And at the same time, one size doesn't fit all. It speaks to the need for us to really speak to all of our stakeholder groups in the school community to understand what they need and how we can best support them, and not to make assumptions, whether that's down to neurodiversity or indeed a raft of other issues. It's in my mind, and it's something for governors to think about, that with the increased attention on mental health and well-being, and in some pockets we've got other issues going on where difficult issues are being discussed in schools, really importantly, but we've also got staff in schools who have personal experience of those issues, and it can be very difficult for them sometimes to get into a conversation with students about stuff that has personally affected them. So there are many layers to the issues that can affect individuals, and how we need to think about everybody involved. But communication, to go back to, Mike made this point loud and clear, communication is at the heart of all of this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sinead. I'm conscious that we're a minute away from the end, but I would just like to hear from each of you one last time on kind of like your one key takeaway for our audience today. I'll start with you, Mike, as I know you've got to rush off for a meeting at 9.
Well, I think Sinead just led me into it. You know, that communication is fundamental. It's fundamental to whatever we do as a local authority. It's listening, being available, and just ensuring for my head teachers that they know they're not alone. Those are the key points.
Fantastic, thank you, Mike. Kath, do you have anything to add there as a takeaway?
As your role as a governor, I would say the takeaway: go and talk to the staff in the school informally, know where they are, so that they know that you are there as a support on their journey wherever they are.
Brilliant, thank you, Kath. And Anthony?
I think I'll build on Kath's point there. I think something that comes loud and clear, and Sinead picked this up, is the appreciation point and piece, I think. And when I speak to schools, looking at, you know, a strategy for wellbeing, some of the smallest things and, you know, gestures can go such a long way to support our staff. So, you know, appreciation and, you know, talking to staff and really seeing the work that they're doing during this time, I think goes a long, long way to support staff wellbeing.
Brilliant, thank you, Anthony. And Sinead, you did just finish there with communication being at the heart, but was there anything else that you wanted to add as a key takeaway?
I think just to say, you know, for many of us who are school governors, we're not the youngest part of the population always. I speak for myself probably more than anyone on the call, but this is a moment in time where mental health has become discussable, and we can be transparent and open, and there doesn't have to be shame or fear about it. And I think it's for us as governors to really take that opportunity to make sure we are, you know, letting the sunshine in to our schools and being really willing to have open conversations.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sinead. I've definitely got a whole host more questions that I could ask on this topic, but it is just gone 9 o'clock, so I will wrap things up. But thank you all of the audience for joining us today, and of course to all of our speakers as well. We'd just like to remind you that our conference is running all week, and so if you enjoyed this session, there's likely to be other sessions over the coming 3 days. In particular, we'd be delighted if you could join us for the launch of our new campaign, All Pupils, Every Ambition, which will be taking place at Friday at 4 p.m. And you can still sign up to all of the sessions on our website. We will be circulating some follow-up information, including links to the recording of the session, links to download all of the slides, as well as additional resources as well. So please do keep an eye out for that in the coming days. But otherwise, thanks again for coming, and have a lovely day ahead.